So President Trump is increasing pressure on Mexico, demanding the country does something to stop undocumented immigrants from crossing the border. Overnight, President Trump tweeted the United States will impose tariffs on Mexico until the flow of migrants stops. 5% tariffs would kick in on June 10th if the problem isn't remedied. The tariffs will then increase by 5% every month until October, at which point they will remain at 25% indefinitely.
In a statement, President Lopez Obrador responded to the president, saying, quote, President Trump, social problems cannot be resolved with taxes or coercive measures. Joining us now is CBS News White House correspondent Weijia Jiang. So, Weijia, what's the goal of these tariffs? We're already seeing some pushback, for example, from Republicans like Chuck Grassley.
Yeah, absolutely. Grassley had a pretty strongly worded statement for President Trump, and he said, look, I usually agree with the president on his immigration ideas and policy, but this is one that I cannot get on board with because he says the president is misusing his ability to use tariffs, and in this case, using it as a weapon for something that is completely different than what it should be used for. Here you have immigration policy, border security pitted with trade, and it just doesn't seem like the two square together. And that's why Republicans have an issue with this. But the president has long complained that Mexico is not doing its part to prevent the flow of migrants. And so he's trying to put pressure on them financially. But as you mentioned, you know, there is pushback already from members of his own party, certainly from Mexico, that is warning there will be retaliatory tariffs, that they're not just going to sit back and take this. However, we should mention there is a delegation coming here to the White House from Mexico today for emergency talks, hoping to find a peaceful solution.
You know, when it comes to the tariffs in China, the president is specifically focused on what he sees as an imbalance in trade, an unfair business practices. This, with Mexico, is sort of a general punishment. But everyone knows that it's us, the American people, that end up paying these tariffs ultimately. So ultimately, the punishment sort of falls on our shoulders. How is the White House justifying this?
You know, Anne Marie, I don't think everyone does know that, because the way President Trump characterizes tariffs is that China and Mexico will pay for these tariffs, and he paints a picture as though these countries are going to just write a paycheck to the U.S. and that's how we're going to get the money. But you're right, of course, it's American businesses and ultimately the consumers who will pay a higher price, because these are essentially taxes on imports from Mexico that U.S. companies have to pay for. But the White House has long said that the crisis at the border is costing millions and millions of dollars, and so that's how they are going to explain this away and say that it's actually a smaller price to pay when you look at how much the U.S. is bleeding in money taking care of these illegal immigrants who end up here in the U.S. and do not leave.
Weijia, there's something else that I think should be pointed out, which is that it appears that the president of the United States is attempting to implement economic policy against one country, that's Mexico, for the actions of a group of people from a completely different country, which could be Guatemala or
El Salvador, wherever, yeah.
A bunch of other people who are not Mexican, and that, I think, is something that we've never seen before. You're essentially telling one country that they're responsible. I understand that they should police their borders, but it seems as if the attack is misdirected. It's directed at Mexico and not the countries that have the exodus of people.
Yeah, this is a blame game that we are seeing play out, and President Trump is clearly setting up a way to explain why there is not a solution for this crisis that he continues to talk about, blaming Mexico, because really, you know, he tried to get immigration reform passed. He failed. He came out and recently said he's actually refusing to work with Democrats on any legislation until they stop their oversight investigations into the Mueller report. And so if he's not going to pass anything through legislation and this crisis continues, you know, he doesn't want to take the blame for this. And so he is clearly painting a picture that's saying, you know, it's our neighbor that's not doing their part. But you're right. I mean, there is certainly enough blame to go around here, but he has really zoomed in on Mexico. And I think he'll be able to say to his supporters that he's being tough on Mexico because they're the ones responsible for allowing the migrants from all those other countries that you mentioned to flow into the U.S.
You know, Weijia, when I first heard the president float this idea, threaten it, I thought to myself, but aren't tariffs already covered by other laws like NAFTA or the, I think, yet to be signed, you can correct me, yet to be signed USMCA?
Right.
Can a president just sort of randomly create new tariffs when there are already laws covering that for at least North America?
Well, he can use tariffs as a tool when it comes to things like we talked about earlier, China, for example, when you're talking about trade deals. This seems to be unprecedented because, again, he's using it in a way to enforce other policies, in this case immigration and border security, and that's why we're seeing so much pushback. In fact, Grassley said that this is counter to congressional intent, that this is a misuse of presidential tariff authority. And so it's going to be interesting to see how the White House explains why the president thinks he can just use this, but he can, and if they don't come to a compromise by June 10th, they will kick in. Of course, we should be clear that the tariffs have not already been imposed. And there is this window of time for U.S. and Mexico to come to some sort of compromise. But the problem is it's unclear exactly how the administration is going to gauge success. There are no numbers, there are no specific targets that the U.S. is asking Mexico to hit in terms of decreasing the number of migrants that come here. It's very vague. In fact, Mick Mulvaney, who briefed reporters on this, said, we're going to handle this on an ad hoc basis. It's a very fluid situation, making it seem like the tariffs can just come and go based on whether Mexico is doing a good job reducing the numbers.
You know, and the president has just tweeted, he wrote this, hard to believe with the crisis on the border, the Dems won't do the quick and easy fix, would solve the problem, but they want open borders, which equals crime. There's a whole lot to unwind there. We don't have time to do that, Weijia, but I also thought the president said that he couldn't work with Congress while they were investigating him. But he's sending that mixed message again. But that's the order of the day in our times. Weijia Jiang at the White House for us. Thank you so much.
Thank you.